Get off this land or I'll put a bullet in you. Karen's voice cracked through the calm stillness of the lake like a storm breaking the sky. She stood tall, declaring herself the president of an HOA that didn't exist, her eyes blazing with fury. In her hands, a Glock 19 was leveled directly at my chest, all because I dared to stay on the lakeside property I had legally purchased, along with the cabin I had just moved into. In her warped imagination, everything about my presence here violated some imaginary community code. But what Karen didn't realize was that the sheriff's badge tucked inside my wallet was about to put an end to her self-made dictatorship. The moment she decided to pull that trigger would be the same moment flashing lights ignited behind me. Have you ever faced a Karen who had no idea just how far out of her league she really was? As her hateful glare bore into me, Margaret's voice came back to me, clear as if she were still here. Frank, sometimes the line between good and evil is just one choice away. I thought retirement would be calm, simple. I couldn't have been more wrong. My name is Frank Morrison, 58 years old. After serving 32 years as sheriff of this county, I finally retired. Just 3 months ago, I buried my wife, Margaret, after her long fight with cancer. Losing her left a hole I couldn't fill. That's when I sold our home in town and bought a cabin on Willowbrook Lake. It wasn't about running away, it was about searching for the quiet life Margaret had always dreamed of. A place where I could fish at dawn, read the paper by dusk, and keep my hands busy fixing up the little things. The cabin itself was row-weathered wood, a tin roof full of rust, but the view over the lake was breathtaking. The first week I spent just sitting by the shore, listening to the water lap against the bank, thinking of Margaret. She always used to smile and say, "Frank, one day we'll have a little house by the lake. I'll plant flowers, and you'll fish." Now it was just me, left to build that dream on my own. By the second week, things started getting strange. Drones hovered outside my cabin with unsettling consistency. At first, I figured it was just kids fooling around, but these flights were scheduled. Same time every morning, same time every evening, as if someone was running surveillance. Then came the yellow papers, slid under my door like junk mail nobody wanted. Violation notice: grass exceeds 3.5 inches, a fine, $50. Violation notice: pickup truck improperly parked, a fine, $75. Each sheet was printed in cheap fonts, designed to look official but screaming amateur fraud. What made it bizarre was that when I bought this place, my old college friend and lawyer, Pete Kowalski, combed through every record. This property wasn't under any HOA jurisdiction, and no filings, no boards, nothing. Yet the bogus violation notices kept arriving, more frequent each week. Then came Karen Whitmore herself. She stormed onto my property one Friday like she was leading a crusade. About 45 years old, calling herself president of the Willowbrook Lake Community Management Board. She was dressed for battle, clipboard in hand, a professional measuring tape, a GoPro strapped to her chest, and a beige blazer. In the middle of summer, she looked less like a neighbor and more like someone staging a corporate takeover of the neighborhood. "You're Mr. Morrison, right?" "I'm Mrs. Whitmore. We need to discuss your violations of community code," she declared, her voice dripping with authority. Without asking, she began measuring everything in sight like an engineer calculating rocket trajectories, logging each detail as if she were gathering evidence for a federal trial. Grass height, 3.8 inches. Mailbox distance from road, 31.2 inches. Driveway width, 6.3 feet. Every move she made was live-streamed with commentary, like she was filming some suburban crime documentary. According to Regulation 4.7.3, grass may not exceed 3 inches. "Yours is at 3.8. Fine, $200. She said it with the gravity of a judge delivering a death sentence. I couldn't help but grin at the absurdity. "Regulations? I haven't received a copy of any rules," she shot back immediately, clearly rehearsed. "Not receiving them doesn't mean they don't exist. The HOA mainframe is updating our distribution system." The phrase HOA mainframe almost made me laugh out loud. Either this woman was delusional or running one of the strangest scams I'd ever seen. When I refused to sign her bogus citation, Karen whipped out her phone and began live streaming. "Ladies and gentlemen, here we have a resident openly define community standards. Tomorrow, I'll be back with our enforcement team." She packed her gear and drove off, her truck rumbling down the dirt road. Watching her leave, I could almost hear Margaret's laugh. Frank, some people need drama just to feel important. What I didn't know then was how far Karen's drama would go. My peaceful retirement was about to turn into the hardest case of my career. The next morning, around 6:30, I woke to the sound of engines pulling into my driveway. Coffee cup in hand, I peeked out the window and nearly laughed. What pulled up looked like a wannabe military convoy, Karen's pickup, a beat-up sedan, and a white van with magnetic HOA enforcement unit signs slapped on the side, so cheaply made they could have been drawn with crayons. Out stepped her so-called team. First, a nervous college kid, Tyler Chen, clipboard in hand, measuring tools dangling like dead weight. Karen had roped him in with promises of internship experience and $15 an hour, convincing him this nonsense counted as law enforcement. Next came Brenda Hayes, a divorced neighbor pushing 50, wearing a vest that read HOA enforcement, the kind of thing you'd find in a Halloween costume. Karen had sold her the lie that property values would collapse unless they got rid of problem residents like me. Then Karen herself strode to my door, knocking with the force of a federal agent serving a warrant. She wore rubber gloves like she was about to perform surgery. "Mr. Morrison, Broken Bar Morrison, this is a mandatory compliance inspection under Emergency Clause 12.4 of the Community Bylaws." Karen announced it like she was delivering a Supreme Court order. I opened the door, coffee steaming in my hand, half curious, half amused to see what circus she had brought this time. "Morning, folks." "So, what's today's emergency?" I asked. Tyler, the nervous college kid, pushed his glasses up and tried to sound official as he glanced at his clipboard. "Sir, we're required to record all violations and prepare a compliance report for county submission." What followed could have passed for a bad comedy routine. Tyler stretched out a tape measure from my cabin to the lake, noting the distance with the seriousness of a NASA scientist. 24.7 feet, he announced. Karen immediately pounced. Regulations clearly require a 25-foot setback. Meanwhile, Brenda took photos of a wooden chair I'd built with my own two hands, shaking her head in disapproval. "Unapproved structure, no architectural clearance." Karen, of course, live-streamed every second with the dramatic flair of a war reporter. "Viewers, this is blatant encroachment. This individual is robbing hard-working families of their right to public lakefront access." That was enough. My instincts from decades in law enforcement started buzzing. Time to test them. "All right," I said. "Let's see an actual copy of these bylaws you keep quoting." Karen didn't hesitate. Her answer was too fast, too polished. "The bylaws are restricted documents. Only verified members can access them." I raised an eyebrow. "Didn't you just call me a member?" She fired back without missing a beat. "You're classified as a probationary member until you pass compliance review." While they continued their performance, I pulled out my phone and ran a quick Google search for Willowbrook Lake HOA. Just as I expected, nothing. No official website, no business records, no tax filings, no address. Absolutely nothing existed. I held up my phone. "Funny. Can you show me a business license or any real paperwork proving this HOA exists?" Karen's response was a politician's dodge. "All administrative documents are being processed through the county. Your only job is to achieve compliance." Tyler leaned toward Brenda and whispered, "Why don't we have anything printed to give residents?" He sounded less convinced than ever. Brenda shifted awkwardly but stayed quiet. Karen then pulled out what she called a final notice, printed on letterhead that looked like it came from an office supply store clearance bin. "You have 48 hours to move all non-compliant structures. Failure to comply will result in immediate involvement from the county sheriff's department." That made me laugh. The sheriff's department? Now that was rich. Tyler's head snapped up at my tone, curiosity flickering across his face. He went right back to measuring anything that didn't move via mailbox height, sidewalk width, even the color of my front door. "Mailbox at 31.2 inches. Regulation requires exactly 30, he declared with all the gravity of solving a murder case. "Door color non-compliant. Must be earth tones from approved palette. Sidewalk width is 6.3 feet. Regulation maximum is 6. Violation noted." Every single detail was documented like it was evidence for trial, but when I took a closer look at their professional tools, The whole act fell apart. Tyler's measuring tape was a cheap Harbor Freight special. Karen's clipboard still had a $1.99 sticker stuck to the back. The official camera was Tyler's phone on a selfie stick. This was less an enforcement squad and more a middle school play. As they packed up to leave, I spotted a drone hovering closer than usual, filming everything. Karen's parting words were delivered with a smug little grin. 24/7 surveillance is essential to our security protocol. We'll be monitoring your compliance in real time. What she didn't know was that my property was fully wired with security cameras of my own. Every second of their bogus inspection had been recorded from multiple angles. Watching their little convoy drive away, the truth sank in. This wasn't just a bunch of overzealous neighbors pretending to run an HOA. This was a deliberate scam. And somehow, I was target number one. The next morning brought more theatre, this time a bright pink slip shoved under my door. Emergency Community Hearing Aid Tuesday, 7 p.m. A Willowbrook Community Center. Subject: Morrison Property Violations and Community Impact Review. The language was dressed up to sound official, but it read as fake as a $3 bill. Still, my curiosity got the better of me. I decided to check out this so-called community center. The address led me to a rundown strip mall anchored by a dollar store and a tax prep service open only during filing season. The community center turned out to be a rented office with a crooked banner taped in the window. Through the glass, I saw Karen inside, setting up folding tables and plastic chairs like she was staging a courtroom drama. The woman's dedication to her fantasy was almost impressive. Knowing I might need backup, I called my nephew, Jake Morrison, a 25-year-old firefighter from the next county over. Jake, you free tonight? Your old uncle could use a witness for what's about to be one very entertaining community meeting. Jake had just brought home his body camera for routine maintenance. Perfect timing. Always happy to help, Uncle Frank. Sounds like a good story. He had no idea just how good it was about to get. That Tuesday evening, I walked into what looked like the most ridiculous mock trial I'd ever seen. About 20 people were crammed into the rented space. At the head table sat Karen, presiding like a judge in her own kangaroo court. She'd even gotten hold of a wooden gavel, or so it seemed. On closer inspection, it was just a ruler glued to a block of wood. Beside her sat Tyler, tapping away on a laptop like a dutiful court reporter, his expression painfully serious, as if this charade actually mattered. Brenda sat among a handful of neighbors I didn't recognize, packed into folding chairs like jurors waiting to pass judgment. But the most surprising addition to this little play was Alan Harper, a polished man in his mid-50s, who introduced himself as legal counsel for the Community Standards Board. He spoke in heavy legal jargon, throwing around impressive-sounding terms that, when you listened closely, boiled down to a whole lot of nothing. In the front row, Mrs. Rodriguez, a kind woman in her 60s I'd seen around the lake, looked increasingly uneasy as the spectacle unfolded. Karen raised her makeshift gavel and slammed it down with all the pomp of a judge on a TV drama. This hearing is now in session under Robert's Rules of Order to address serious violations threatening our neighborhood stability and property values. Alan rose, adjusting his tie with exaggerated seriousness. He held up a manila folder stuffed with papers. Evidence packets A through G prove willful non-compliance with community standards that directly impact every resident's investment. I decided it was time to cut through the nonsense. Before we go any further, I want to see this HOA's incorporation documents. Karen froze just a little too long before answering, her voice sharp. Legal paperwork isn't relevant to compliance hearings conducted under community protocols. She just made a mistake. Actually, by state law, every HOA has to file incorporation papers with the county clerk. I've checked the records myself and nothing exists. From the corner of the room, Jake sat quietly, his body camera recording everything while he blended into the crowd. Alan noticed the device and stiffened. Recording equipment is not permitted during official proceedings of this nature. Jake didn't even flinch. This is standard first responder safety gear. I wear it all the time. The fact that they wanted to shut down documentation told me all I needed to know about their so-called official process. The tension in the room was building, and I figured it was time to play my trump card. I stood, pulled out my wallet, and placed my sheriff's badge squarely on the table. I'm Frank Morrison, retired sheriff, 32 years serving this county. And what you people are doing here is impersonating legal authority, a serious federal offense." The room fell silent. Mrs. Rodriguez let out a breath of relief. "I knew it. I saw you on the news last year during that missing child case." Tyler nearly jumped out of his seat. "Do your law enforcement?" "Mrs. Whitmore, you told me he was just some retired guy. You said this was legitimate." Alan Harper started sliding papers back into his folder, clearly preparing to vanish before things got uglier. But Karen clung to her collapsing performance like a drowning woman to a log. "Being ex-law enforcement doesn't exempt you from our community rules. These standards apply to everyone equally." Her eyes betrayed her, thought with the fear was setting in. And Jake's camera caught the moment Alan's business card slipped from his folder onto the table. Zooming in, Jake captured it in full view. "Harper Associate has a personal injury law, not HOA counsel." The papers Alan had scattered were nothing but cheap internet templates. The so-called bylaws, printed in Comic Sans. Of all things, no legitimate legal document would ever use that. That's when Mrs. Rodriguez finally stood. "Karen, I joined this because I thought it was about improving the neighborhood, but these are fake hearings. Fake lawyers said this is wrong, probably illegal." Other neighbors started speaking up, their voices rising. "Where's the charter? Who elected you president? What's happening to all the money from these fines?" I stepped forward, letting my voice carry the weight of 3 decades in law enforcement. "This is fraud. You're looking at impersonation of authority, extortion, and staging false legal proceedings." "Jake, you've got this all recorded." Jake nodded, every word, every face, crystal clear. Karen's face turned crimson, her fury mixing with panic. She knew the scam was crumbling around her. Still, she tried to fire back one last shot. "You think flashing that badge scares me, Morrison? Tomorrow night, this ends on my property, my rules, my decision." Her words dripped with menace. This wasn't just about fake regulations anymore. She was threatening me directly, and I could tell by the look in her eyes. The next round wouldn't be some phony courtroom drama. It would be a fight. The following morning, the sound of chainsaws tore me from sleep. 6 a.m. isn't anyone's idea of a peaceful wake-up, especially when the noise is coming from your own yard. I stumbled outside with my coffee, still groggy, only to see Tyler and 2 unfamiliar young men hacking down bushes and trees along the shoreline on my property. They weren't even trying to hide it. The crew worked with the speed and precision of professionals, which might have been admirable if they weren't blatantly trespassing on my land in broad daylight. "Morning, gentlemen," I said evenly. "Care to explain why you're trimming and cutting on property that doesn't belong to you?" Though my tone stayed casual, my instincts were already taking mental notes. Tyler looked uneasy, like a kid caught sneaking candy from the jar. "Mr. Morrison, sir," he stammered, "Mrs. Whitmore said this area is part of the community's shared lakefront upkeep." I asked if he had written permission from the actual property owner. His reply revealed just how deep this deception really went. "She told us you're not the legal owner anymore. That easement issues voided your rights here." One of the other workers, a teenager named Marcus Webb, whipped out his phone and started recording. "Yo, Karen, this guy's hassling us for doing legit community work." I stayed calm despite the baiting. "No one's being threatened here. I'm just letting you know this is trespassing on private property, which is against the law." The fact that Karen had managed to convince these young men they were performing some noble duty was both disturbing and telling. By 8 o'clock, Karen arrived with what looked more like a small-scale military deployment than a neighborhood committee. Her pickup truck rolled in, trailed by a rented moving van stacked with heavy landscaping gear. She wasn't alone. Alan Harper, somehow bold enough to return after yesterday's humiliation, had brought reinforcements. This time, he introduced a new face, Roy Blackwood, who claimed to be a municipal property assessment specialist. Mid-40s, reflective vest, tablet in hand, and loaded down with surveying gadgets. He looked the part, but his words betrayed him. He rattled off official-sounding terminology, mixing up property lines with municipal boundaries and calling property taxes community assessments. His act might have fooled the untrained, but it was clear he had no genuine authority. "Mr. Morrison," Roy announced, "our initial findings show your structures encroaching into designated easement zones. We are authorized to restore lawful public access immediately. Then Karen played her most outrageous card yet. She pulled up a video on her tablet that appeared to show me smashing a picnic table with a sledgehammer. The problems were obvious. The man in the footage wore a red flannel shirt. I don't even own one. The shadows were inconsistent with the orientation of my property, and there had never been a picnic table on my land to begin with. Jake, still quietly documenting with his body cam, asked to inspect the video. Uncle Frank, this is interesting, he said after a quick look. The file name is literally labeled a deepfake Morrison final.mp4. Created yesterday. Karen lunged to grab the tablet back, sputtering something about backup technical file names. The excuse was pitiful. From across the street, Mrs. Rodriguez finally stepped forward, her voice sharp with conviction. Enough. This has crossed the line. Faking videos isn't a neighborhood issue, it's a crime. Her courage sparked others. More neighbors emerged, drawn by the noise and the tension. Just then, Dave Jenner returned home from his overnight shift, arriving in time to see his son being dragged into the mess. Tyler, what the hell is this? You told me you were hired for community work, not this circus. His voice was furious. Tyler's face strained as reality hit him. He looked from the bogus video, to the phony equipment, to Karen's desperate scrambling. Mrs. Whitmore, he said slowly, you lied to me. About everything. There's no HOA, no authority, nothing. I felt genuine pity for him. He was young, and he'd been expertly manipulated. Alan Harper tried one last time to seize control, layering on empty legal jargon. Everyone must stay calm. These are complicated matters. Mob reactions won't solve them. But Jake's camera caught Harper dropping another business card. This one read, Harper Legal Services, a bankruptcy foreclosure. Yesterday, it had said personal injury law. Dave Chen then connected the dots aloud. Wait a second. Mrs. Chen mentioned she got fined last month. Mrs. Park too. Come to think of it, all these so-called violations hit lakefront properties, didn't they? The pattern became impossible to ignore. Every target lived on valuable waterfront land. Jake and I pieced it together quickly. Over the past 6 months, a dozen lakefront homes had been hit with escalating fines. The victims were mostly elderly or newer homeowners, a prime candidates to pressure into selling. Even worse, a company called Lakefront Properties LLC was already listing some of those homes online as pre-foreclosure opportunities, priced suspiciously low. I made a quick call to Pete Kowalski to confirm. Pete, I need you to check county records. Anything on Harper and Associates, Harper Legal Services, or Municipal Assessment Services. Also, see if Willowbrook Lake has any HOA filings. The answer came back fast. Nothing. None of those businesses are registered. And there hasn't been an HOA filing for Willowbrook Lake in over 10 years. Their whole operation was unraveling in real time. That's when Karen dropped the pretense. Her tone hardened, cold and threatening. If the community won't accept proper legal authority, we'll handle this privately. Security doesn't require anyone's approval. Beside her, Roy Blackwood made a call, his voice intentionally loud enough for me to catch. Yeah, Danny, bring your team. That evening, it became clear that the situation with Morrison had reached a breaking point. As the sun dipped behind the trees, Karen returned with Alana, and with them, a black SUV carrying a man I'd never encountered before. His name was Danny Torres, clearly brought in as hired muscle meant to intimidate. Morrison, this is your final warning, Harper said, flashing a cold smile. You have 24 hours to vacate voluntarily. If not, we'll move forward in ways that won't require your cooperation. His words were laced with threat, thinly disguised as formality. He added, almost casually, you know, some older residents put themselves in dangerous positions when they try to resist the will of the community. I caught Torres discreetly adjusting the weapon beneath his jacket, and the reality hit me. Tomorrow would not bring more sham paperwork or phony legal claims. It would bring direct confrontation. These people were ready to escalate, even through violence. My 3 decades in law enforcement had prepared me for moments exactly like this, and I understood with certainty, this had crossed far beyond a neighborhood squabble. This was organized crime, and it needed to be investigated with precision. The repeated targeting, the lies wrapped in bureaucracy, and the sudden leap to physical threats. It all followed the playbook of a criminal enterprise. That meant it had to be documented, exposed, and dismantled. Jake took leave from his firefighter shift to assist, and his technical skills turned out to be invaluable. "Uncle Frank, you need to see this," he said, pulling up his laptop. He had found a Facebook group titled Willowbrook HOA Residents, boasting 47 members and created just 2 months earlier. Yet every post was either from Karen or from obviously fake profiles with stock images and generic names. We began cross-referencing property records against the complaint timelines. A disturbing pattern emerged quickly. In just 6 months, 12 lakefront homes had been hit with violations in an identical fashion, and every one of the owners fit a profile: either elderly residents living alone or newcomers still unfamiliar with local customs. To fully understand the scope, I started calling other victims directly. Mrs. Helen Parker, a 74-year-old widow 3 houses away, answered with relief when she heard my name. "Thank heavens, Mr. Morrison. That awful woman has driven me into such stress I had to start medication for my blood pressure. She fined me $800 over a handmade birdhouse, said it didn't meet their community aesthetic." Jake and I built a detailed victim database. The numbers were staggering. Tom Bradley, a 62-year-old veteran, carried $1,200 in fines. Maria Santos, a 45-year-old single mother working 2 jobs, was threatened with foreclosure unless she paid off supposed violations. Robert Kim, who had just moved in at 38, was billed $900 for the offense of staining his own deck. The pattern was unmistakable: methodical, predatory, and deliberate. First, suffocating fines created financial pressure. Then, carefully timed offers appeared suggesting owners sell. Before matters got complicated, this wasn't incompetence, it was manipulation crafted by professionals. Jake then uncovered the piece that tied everything together. "Uncle Frank, look at this," he said, showing me a website, Lakefront Properties LLC. It was listing 5 homes belonging to victims, each priced far below market value. They were advertised as pre-foreclosure opportunities, and the contact phone number matched Karen's official whole line exactly. Determined, I tried tracking Harper at his so-called office, but the address led only to a co-working space in a strip mall. The receptionist was puzzled when I asked about him. "Mr. Harper doesn't have an office here. Sometimes he books a conference room, pays in cash for a couple of hours, and leaves." That revelation told me everything I needed. Harper wasn't the mastermind. He was just a cog in middle management for a bigger machine. The templates, targeting, and logistics had to be coming from higher up. Returning home, I found Karen's pickup and the black SUV blocking my driveway like a checkpoint. She was live streaming at the edge of my property, her tone brimming with new confidence. "Day 4 of our standoff with a non-compliant occupant," she announced. "As an elected leader, I'm duty-bound to protect the rights of law-abiding residents." Roy Blackwood stepped forward next. Gone was the phony authority from before. Now, menace dripped from his every word. "Morrison, you're making this too personal. People higher up in this operation aren't happy with your interference." I told him plainly he was making threats. His reply chilled me. "Not a threat, a reality check. You had a quiet retirement ahead of you. Don't complicate it." From the SUV, 2 more enforcers emerged: Edith Torres and another man, Rick Santos. They didn't bother with words. Instead, they moved into position around my property, posting themselves like trained soldiers establishing a perimeter. Their silent discipline told me everything. These weren't random thugs. They knew exactly what they were doing. That night, despite the danger, Mrs. Rodriguez bravely hosted an informal meeting in her backyard. 8 families came, including victims who had been too afraid to speak before. The unity that began forming among us was vital and maybe the only weapon we had. Tom Bradley presented county records he dug up. Karen Whitmore has acquired 3 lakefront homes in the last year through questionable tax lien sales. And guess what? Each belonged to people she'd already driven into financial ruin. Maria Santos, tears in her eyes, described how close she'd come to losing her place. She told me I owed $2,500 in fines, said they'd put a lien on my home if I didn't pay. I nearly sold below market just to get away from the nightmare. Then Mrs. Parker revealed how Harper had approached her directly. Last week he came with pre-printed contracts, told me if I signed the deed over it would clear everything and save me thousands. I nearly agreed. As I stood before them all, the truth was undeniable. This isn't a local scam. I told them, this is an organized criminal enterprise and it's operating across multiple jurisdictions. We were staring down a mess that had gone far beyond HOA disputes. This was fraud, extortion, impersonation of authority, and systematic exploitation of vulnerable residents. Jake's digging confirmed my suspicions. Similar schemes were unfolding in 3 nearby counties, each following the same playbook with identical shell companies behind them. Later that evening, Karen showed up with her crew Alan, Danny, and Rick ready for what she clearly thought would be the final showdown. She barked out the same ultimatum, "Morrison, this is your last chance to leave willingly. Tomorrow at sunset, we enforce removal whether you cooperate or not." Alan added his own icy warning, his words as sharp as his smile. Older folks who resist usually wind up in a broken bar. Unfortunate situations. Accidents happen. Danny didn't bother to hide the pistol at his side this time, and Rick quietly stationed himself to block my exit. What they didn't count on was Jake's quick thinking. His body cam and phone were live streaming the entire encounter to social media. Viewers flooded the stream with outrage, urging us to involve the police and document every second. When they left, I sat on the porch and ran through the situation like I had done countless times during my law enforcement career. Negotiations were finished. Legal loopholes and paperwork games were over. These people had escalated to firearms and direct threats, which meant they were prepared to use violence. The only question left was, just how far were they willing to go to protect their racket? Have you ever run into someone pretending to be an authority figure, only to discover they were nothing but a con artist? I'm Jason Miller, reporting from Chicago. Drop your thoughts in the comments below before we get into how this tense standoff unfolds. Friday morning broke sharp and clear, the kind of morning that makes everything feel more intense. I knew this would be the day when things either collapsed into their hands or finally unraveled. At 5 a.m., I made a call I had hoped I'd never need to make. "Pete, tonight could get dangerous in ways I can't predict. I need someone I can trust to back me up." Quietly. He didn't hesitate to voice his concern. "Frank, you've lost it. Call the sheriff and let them deal with it." I had to explain why that wouldn't work. Sheriff Tom Bradley Jr. was the son of one of Karen's victims. That conflict of interest could derail everything. I needed to keep this clean, methodical, and airtight. Meanwhile, Jake had rallied the neighborhood. We set up a surveillance net to capture every angle of what was about to unfold. Mrs. Rodriguez offered her home as the HOA. It had clear sightlines across the lakefront. Dave Chen wired emergency floodlights that could be triggered remotely. Tom Bradley Sr., leaning on his military background, set up recording gear at key spots for maximum coverage. By 6 p.m., they arrived like an invading force. Karen led in her pickup, followed by Alan's car, the black SUV with Danny and Rick, and a white van marked Professional Property Services. Inside were tools and men clearly prepared to haul my belongings out by force. Karen strutted to the lakeside picnic table and set up her command post with a laptop, cameras, and even a bullhorn she must have bought for this performance. Alan looked like he was about to argue in court, while Danny and Rick made no attempt to conceal their firearms. The message was obvious. This wouldn't end with paperwork. Through the bullhorn, Karen bellowed across the lake, "Mr. Morrison, this is your final notice. You have 10 minutes to vacate and surrender your keys." It would have been laughable theater if not for the loaded weapons backing her words. But my neighbors had gathered too, standing at their property lines with homemade signs. "We support Frank Morrison and stop fake HOA fraud." Dave Chen's wife streamed the scene live, ensuring we had undeniable evidence if this ended up in court. When I refused to move, the crew from the white van grabbed crowbars and power tools and headed toward my cabin. Jake stepped forward, calm and steady. "Gentlemen," he said evenly, "do you have legal authorization from the actual owner to access this property?" Their leader replied with flimsy authority, "We're contractors authorized under community rules to clear the premises." Jake pressed further, "Authorized by who?" Can you show written documentation granting you access to private property? Alan tried to intimidate him with his usual legal gibberish. Interfering with lawful property proceedings is a crime. Young man, step aside before you face serious consequences. Jake stood firm, his voice steady. I'm recording under lawful public safety protocols. Citizens have every right to document so-called legal actions in public view. That's when Danny Torres dropped the act completely. He stepped toward me with pure menace in his eyes. You can make this easy, or you can make it difficult. Either way, it ends tonight. Her words hung heavy in the evening air, but I stayed calm with the kind of composure that comes from decades of facing volatile situations. My reply was steady, deliberate. I choose to stand on actual law. This property is legally mine, and you have zero authority to be here. Karen's mask of confidence cracked when the neighbors turned against her. Her bullhorn pronouncements were drowned out by angry voices. Karen, you're running a scam. Stop lying. We checked the county records. There's no HOA. The illusion of control she'd worked so hard to maintain was collapsing in front of witnesses, and desperation began to take over. Alan Harper, trying to salvage order, barked an instruction to Danny. Proceed with the clearance operation as discussed. The crew moved toward my cabin with crowbars, but I stepped directly into the doorway. Gentlemen, what you're attempting is breaking and entering a felony. I spent over 30 years in law enforcement, and I'm telling you to stop before you ruin your lives. Then came the moment I'll never forget. Karen's composure shattered completely. Screaming, she pulled a Glock 19 from her purse and leveled it at my chest. Her hands trembled with fury and panic, making her even more dangerous than a calm criminal. I've had enough of your games. Leave now or face the consequences. The community's reaction was immediate. Parents grabbed their children. Neighbors screamed. Phones lit up with frantic 911 calls. Mrs. Rodriguez shouted into her phone, rattling off our exact location. Through it all, Jake kept recording, even with a gun in play. I raised my hand slowly, speaking with the same calm authority I'd once used to defuse armed standoffs. Karen, right now you're committing felony assault with a deadly weapon in front of witnesses and on camera. Put the gun down, and we can end this peacefully. Her reply was chilling. No more talking. You ruined everything. You destroyed my operation. It was part confession, part threat. Alan, realizing the situation had spiraled out of control, panicked. Karen, put the weapon away. This wasn't supposed to involve violence. Even Danny backed away, muttering, "Lady, I didn't sign up to shoot civilians. This has gone way too far." In that razor-thin moment, I reached into my wallet and pulled out my badge, setting it where she could see. "Karen, I'm Frank Morris, a retired sheriff of this county." You're pointing a loaded gun at a law officer. But her grip didn't loosen. Her eyes burned with delusion. "I don't care who you used to be." Then hope arrived. The wail of sirens grew louder. Red and blue lights flickered through the trees. Officers poured onto the scene. "Still," Karen screamed, "nobody's coming to save you. I control everything here." But Alan had already vanished into the night, abandoning her when the heat became too much. "Final warning, to drop your weapon now." The lead officer's voice cut through the chaos like a blade. Karen's hands finally shook loose of the Glock. It clattered onto the dock, echoing in the silence that followed. Her reign over our community had ended. I was protecting community property. She shrieked as handcuffs locked around her wrists. "He's the real danger." But nobody believed her anymore. The witnesses, the recordings, and the financial trail told the real story. The lead officer was Sergeant Maria Gonzalez, someone I had personally trained years ago. "Sheriff Morrison, are you hurt?" she asked, relief written across her face. "I'm fine, Maria, but I've got evidence of an organized crime operation much bigger than tonight." Neighbors immediately handed over everything: Jake's footage, Mrs. Rodriguez's video, Tom Bradley's financial records. The evidence was airtight. Before the night ended, word came in. Alan Harper's car had been found abandoned 2 miles away. He'd fled on foot. Danny and Rick were caught at a county checkpoint. The van workers, it turned out, were day laborers tricked into the job, and they were released after questioning. By morning, Jake's livestream had gone viral. Karen pulls gun on retired sheriff was everywhere, pulling hundreds of thousands of views overnight. Comments poured in. She messed around and found out. A broken bar finally, real law enforcement standing up to scammers. The next day, the community came together for something we hadn't felt in years: a healing. Dave Chen hosted a truth and reconciliation barbecue by the lake. Neighbors shared food, stories, and apologies for being misled. Tyler Chan, looking remorseful, came to me. "Mr. Morrison, I'm sorry. I thought I was helping the neighborhood. I didn't realize it was all a scam." I put a hand on his shoulder. "Son, you were tricked by professionals. Learn from it. Use it to grow stronger." Even Mrs. Rodriguez confessed her shame. "Frank, I feel guilty for believing Karen's lies. I should have trusted my instincts." Her honesty reminded me how even good people can be deceived without losing their decency. The county investigation exposed the full scope of Harper's scheme. He'd run similar scams in multiple counties through shell companies. Lakefront Properties LLC was dissolved, assets frozen, and restitution ordered. Karen faced charges of armed assault, fraud, extortion, and impersonating authority. Alan was indicted under RICO laws. Every fake HOA fine was voided, victims repaid from seized assets. Jake's live stream launched him into a new role: a public information officer for the county, focusing on crime prevention. "Uncle Frank, I learned more this week than 4 years of school taught me," he told me. His determination made me proud. 6 months later, justice was served. Karen was sentenced to 4 years in prison. Alan was caught in Florida trying to run another scam and extradited back. The hired muscle received probation and community service. Our neighborhood was transformed. We built a real, voluntary homeowners association, a transparent, democratic, focused on conservation and community. I finished my cabin renovations and planted a memorial garden for Margaret, overlooking the lake. Monthly potlucks on my property became a tradition, families laughing where fear once lived. Jake turned his footage into a 45-minute documentary, How One Retired Sheriff Exposed a Real Estate Scam Network. It was screened at festivals and used by law enforcement agencies as training material. Now, each morning I sip coffee on the deck, watching kids fish while Mrs. Rodriguez's grandchildren feed the ducks. Margaret would have loved this. The community rebuilt itself on trust, not fear. A letter from the FBI arrived last week, asking for my help on similar cases nationwide. Evil never rests, but neither should those willing to fight it. Have you ever faced someone abusing fake authority, a landlord, or even a workplace bully? I know that powerless feeling, but this story proves that with courage, unity, and documentation, ordinary people can topple organized fraud. At Ya Stories, I share real cases where underdogs fight back and win. If you believe in justice, subscribe for more stories where good people rise up against intimidation and prevail. Thanks for watching. If you've ever received one of those shady official letters from people who have no authority, know this: you're not alone. Ya Stories is here to shine a light on the frauds and stand with the communities they target.